Good afternoon and happy Thursday. For this week's video discussion board, I chose Phyllis Wheatley. I chose her primarily because I was familiar with her poetry, having studied it in undergrad as an English major, and also in African American history studies classes. I was familiar with her as a figure. However, I decided to choose her for this assignment because I have never really studied her as a potential or prominent um, American revolutionary figure. To do this assignment, kind of delve into more as to what she may stand for as a historical figure from the American Revolution. Phyllis Wheatley was born in Gambia, Africa, sometime in 1753. She was captured as a slave by slave traders and brought to America in 1761. And when she was brought to America, particularly Boston, Massachusetts, she was bought by the Wheatley family, and therefore that is what her last name is. And Phyllis refers to the ship that she was brought into America. So they named her after the slave ship that brought her to America. Her family educated her, and within about a year and a half of being in America, she was fluent in English. She could read the Bible, Greek, Latin. And by 14, she began writing her own poetry and published her first poem in 1767. Her probably most famous, well, maybe not famous, but her introductory poem, an elegiac poem on the death of celebrated divine George Whitefield, published in 1770, is kind of what first put her on the map. And then 1773, what she definitely is most renowned for, is her first collection of poem entitled Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral. It was the first book written by an African American, and to some extent it was contested as to whether or not she had even written it. And so she had to, I guess, be certified by both her master, Wheatley, and her publisher, and Boston notables such as John Hancock, who actually signed her forward in her poetry book as an attestation of the fact that she had written it. In his article, Phyllis Wheatley Quest for Identity, Audi Ode notes that Wheatley was the first African American, the first slave, and incidentally the third woman to publish, and that she gained a lot of notoriety and gained a lot of fame despite the realities of the colonial time, and that she kind of rose to a sense of prominence, at least for a short period, because of the subject matters of some of her poetry, George Washington, George Whitefield, etc. In the article Talking Back, Phyllis Wheatley, Race and Religion, Keith Byerman makes a similar discussion regarding her compliments, but emphasizes more the sort of waxing and waning that went on in terms of criticisms of her work and her in general, and not just during the revolutionary times, but throughout the years, currently, presently, how there's just, I guess, a weird pendulum swing in terms of whether she's exalted, whether she's criticized, whether she's looked at as a prominent figure that had anything to do with the revolution, abolition, anti-slavery movements, etc. In Leah Malilo's How Betsy Ross Became Famous, she questions and answers historically the same thing. Is there a need for female revolutionaries? Are women like Phyllis Wheatley, do they reflect the values of the country? And I think that is particularly interesting in the case of Phyllis Wheatley, because I think historians can't quite figure out where to place her in terms of the values that she espoused and what she may have stood for. Was it her devoutness in Christianity that she promoted, which is clear in many of her writings? Or was she a spokesman for the abolition of slavery? Did she merely just speak of her own experiences rather than, placing any values on the larger situation that was going on in the country at the time. Were her writings just commentary on things that were going on? As I mentioned, she wrote a poem about George Washington, kind of raving about him as a general, and at the same time also wrote on George Whitfield, um, in great reverence. And so a lot of her poetry, um, doesn't necessarily show a trend per se, but has certain themes that I think historians kind of struggle with in terms of trying to figure out where she falls. But very much a necessary, um, addition to the American Revolutionary landscape. One, because of her accomplishments, and obviously two, because of her commentary on what was going on at the time. Thank you.